I've always found the GameCube generation to be Nintendo's awkward years. They churned out timeless games in their typical style, like Mario Kart Double Dash, The Wind Waker, Super Smash Bros. Melee, and F-Zero GX. But Nintendo also decided to take Sony and Microsoft head-on at what they do best, releasing darker, grittier games with more mature content, and engaging with third-party publishers for exclusives. Nintendo secured Resident Evil 4, Resident Evil 0, and Resident Evil Remake as GameCube exclusives. They worked with Konami to develop a remake to Metal Gear Solid exclusively for GameCube. They made Metroid Prime a first-person adventure to ostensibly rival Halo. And most inexplicably of all, partnered with developer Silicon Knights to develop and publish an H.P. Lovecraft-inspired, gory psychological horror fest called Eternal Darkness, Sanity's Requiem, the first M-rated game ever released directly by Nintendo. Before starting, I would like to mention that this review will contain spoilers. I feel this game is more than worth a playthrough, but it is most effective knowing as little about the plot as possible. If you would like to play it at some point, I do not recommend watching this review until you do. Eternal Darkness is about as close to a Lovecraft story as it can be without making explicit connections. A group of ancient gods have been in a deadlock for centuries, each plotting a way to eliminate their rivals and dominate humanity. Their powers and motivations are beyond human understanding, and the game does an incredible job of making you feel that way by starting the game in the middle of a story that has already been in progress for centuries. Unbeknownst to the player, the first character you control, a Roman general named Pius Augustus, is the ultimate antagonist of the game. He will traverse a dungeon and can choose one of 3 idols, a choice that is both incredibly important and utterly meaningless. The quick prologue then ends immediately. You're given no information about what happened or what it means. Instead, we quickly move on to the closest the main character Eternal Darkness has. Alex Roivas' grandfather has been brutally murdered, and she has arrived at his Rhode Island mansion to identify his body. She has no clue how or why something like this could have happened. Upon searching the empty mansion, she discovers the Tome of Eternal Darkness, which starts the cycle of gameplay. Alex solves puzzles in the mansion that reveal new pages of the tome, which start the next chapter, each of which focuses on a different character. Each character's chapter offers Alex a hint or a new power that will allow her to locate the next page. Every character is just a normal person who got caught up in this by chance and suffers greatly for it. Eternal Darkness does not pull its punches.
Why couldn't you have been killed with your parents?
Shigeru Miyamoto is listed as a producer for this game. It's worth mentioning the stellar cast voicing these characters. It's pretty much a Metal Gear Solid reunion. The voice actors for Solid Snake, Liquid Snake, Colonel Campbell, Gray Fox, and Mei Ling are all here. Alex is voiced by the magnificent Jennifer Hale, not only the voice of Naomi from Metal Gear Solid, but also Femshep from Mass Effect. They even got the voice of Porkins.
Cover me, Porkins.
I'm right with you, Red 3.
You might assume that would mean there is plentiful voice acting in this game. You would be wrong. There is the absolute minimum amount of dialogue required to communicate this story. There is no inner dialogue from characters as they move around the game world, which is honestly a welcome treat. But one of the 11 main characters has only 3 voice lines in his entire hour-long chapter. This lack of dialogue is effective in giving the player just enough information to know that something evil is on the horizon, but not enough to figure out exactly what is happening until the very end. Having the player be confused to some degree is an important part of creating the experience this game desires. The downside is that the characters are barely more than mannequins. They have so little personality that you are unable to do any more than pity them. The chapters take place over a large period of time in 4 locations: the Roivas Mansion, a tomb in Cambodia, a church in France, and a dungeon in the Middle East. 3 locations are very distinct and change significantly each time you visit them. Unfortunately, the Cambodian tomb doesn't change much, and looks like 90% the same room with an unchanging, ugly color scheme. Luckily, that location is done with by mid-game. But how the game uses these locations is what makes it special. When Eternal Darkness was announced, it generated hype around one gimmick: insanity. In addition to a health meter and a magic meter, your character would have a sanity meter. You lose sanity anytime an enemy appears, and you have to finish the enemy after killing it to regain that sanity. If you run away, you simply lose that sanity. As the sanity meter drops, you will be more likely to see a number of effects meant not only to affect the in-game character, but also to fuck with you, the player. If you try to run because Eternal Darkness gets scary, it will only get scarier. Maybe you will finish a level, and the game will show you a screen indicating the demo is over. Maybe in the middle of a fight, the screen will go black. Maybe blood will randomly run down the walls. Maybe it will display dozens of tiny bugs running all over your TV. I didn't capture footage of that particular effect in this playthrough. I'm not going back to look for it either, so take my word for it or look it up on YouTube. There are dozens of these types of effects, ranging from very subtle noises in the background to books flying around a room. Some can easily be missed. They are used sparingly enough to constantly catch you off guard. There is a feeling of permanent tension when your sanity meter drops, and most of the time the game will simply not pull the trigger. This makes for a much scarier experience overall. If there is one aspect the game gets perfectly right, this is it. It was not just a gimmick. Eternal Darkness uses much more than sanity effects to establish dread. This is a very disturbing game by any measure, let alone as a Nintendo game. It's willing to push its toes into some very taboo areas.
Ah, sweet Alex. Many centuries I've waited for you. You can try to fight me, but in the end you shall succumb to my desires.
Shigeru Miyamoto is listed as a producer for this game. There is no reluctance to push limits in imagery and content. The chamber holding the tome is unsettling and contains broken statues of every person who has crossed paths with it and died. Mutilated corpses litter the game, some serving as major plot points. The game's gradual reveal of the fate of Maximilian, one of Alex's forefathers, is extremely disturbing. He ends his chapter finding out the truth of what is happening, followed by a quick cut to him in a mental institution, implying that he told the public what he saw and immediately was institutionalized. Later you find that he wasn't immediately locked away, instead spending time studying the Ancient Ones, and was slowly being driven insane by them. He saw delusions that all of his servants were secretly conspiring with the Ancient Ones, and then proceeds to murder them in their sleep.
May the rats eat your eyes! I am now lost to your cause! The darkness comes! It will damn us all!
Shigeru Miyamoto is listed as a producer for this game. Eternal Darkness also creates atmosphere in subtle ways. The music, or lack thereof, was a brilliant move. I've commented before about horror games that silence would be more effective than their existing soundtracks. The developers here understood that. There really isn't much of a soundtrack here at all. Just more ambience, or discordant beats drowning in silence. Music appears occasionally, just to add some flavor. It jumps at times to startle you, but mostly it leaves you alone with your own discomfort. It allows for the only element of the sanity system that is used often: quiet voices and noises in the background. Some of these noises are so quiet, you may not even realize you were hearing them. Unfortunately, some are louder and used way too much, like the loud knocking of doors throughout the game. It's a jump scare the first time, annoying the next 200 times. The only part that pulls the player out of the game's thrall is graphics. This was a graphically impressive game at the time, and for the most part it has aged well. But there are some very rough parts. In one chapter you will find yourself at a balcony, overlooking an epic dark city. What you see is essentially a low-res JPEG. Other shots of the city are extremely impressive, so I don't know what is happening here. Unfortunately, these low-res JPEGs are kind of scattered throughout the game. In addition, some character models just look off. It drifts between gorgeous and dated. When Eternal Darkness looks bad, it looks bad enough to really draw you back to reality. But altogether, when I think back on Eternal Darkness, I remember what emotions I was feeling when playing. It's one of the greatest accomplishments in atmosphere in any game I have ever played. It's a shame gameplay had to get in the way of everything. Eternal Darkness takes its structure from classic static background Resident Evil. It's best to think of it as 12 smaller Resident Evil vignettes, each with their own mini-mansion, so to speak. Your character explores the area, figures out puzzles that involve the environment, items, and the game's magic system, all while dealing with enemies. It has a bigger focus on puzzles and a smaller focus on combat. It would have been best to eliminate combat entirely. Characters are too slow, control is clunky, it's easy to get caught on edges in the environment, and your sword hits invisible walls constantly. The camera system is more focused on creating cinematic angles than helping you see what's going on. The camera moves at times, which you would think would improve visibility, but instead seems to purposely obscure what is only a foot in front of you. And since Eternal Darkness uses directional analog movement, rather than Resident Evil tank controls, you constantly have to adjust the joystick anytime the camera shifts. In areas featuring traps on the floor, it makes it near impossible to avoid, even when you can easily see them. This elicits nothing but rage. Each character has their own strengths and weaknesses, but since all but two are just innocent regular people, they have significant weaknesses. Some are very slow and have major issues dodging attacks. Others have little health and have to get by with speed and magic. In any situation, it is hard to target the enemy you want. These character weaknesses only magnify the overall issues plaguing combat. Chapter 11, the best chapter in the game, proves this. It rounds out the plot, features the most defined character in the game, and has fun, functional combat. It stars Michael Edwards, a firefighter who is the most physically capable character in the game. He moves quickly and agilely, has a powerful melee attack, and access to powerful guns. He does not feel frustrating to move, and even aiming seems more fluid. None of this makes combat easier. It's one of the more difficult chapters in that regard. It doesn't detract from the horror or dread either. Michael has one of the smallest sanity meters in the game, making you feel more on edge all the time. Being more difficult to control, to fit in with the plot, is not worth the frustration it causes. The puzzle portion of gameplay, on the other hand, is inventive and engaging. For example, you may find a door that is locked in the mansion. Searching around the area, you find two pieces of a broken key. You can combine these two into one item, but it is still broken and will fall apart if you try to use it. You could try searching for another item that could repair the key, or you could get experimental and use your enchant item spell. Eternal Darkness integrates the best aspects of old-school point-and-click adventure games better than any Resident Evil ever has. Some of the solutions to these puzzles are just ingenious, and that is due to the magic system. It is based on runes with specific powers, and tablets that tell you what those powers are that you collect throughout the game. But you don't need the tablet that explains their usage to actually use them in a spell. At any time you can try and create your own spells using the runes you have. This allows you to use spells earlier than when you find those tablets, or even the scrolls that explain the actual spells themselves. Almost all of the spells have aspects that affect both combat and puzzles, such as a reveal invisible spell that shows you invisible enemies and hidden paths. It makes the puzzles feel very satisfying without an explosion of frustration beforehand. A downside to the magic system is the sheer number of spells. There are over 10, but each spell has 4 versions that align with each of the ancient ones. Some solutions require spells of a specific alignment. There are only 4 customizable spell hotkeys, meaning you will be stumbling through the game's clunky menus often. Eternal Darkness has questionable replayability. From a story perspective, there is immense value to replaying the game. The regular ending feels like it is purposely missing a huge plot point, and thus feels a bit unsatisfying. Once you beat the game from all 3 alignments, you receive an epilogue that explains the inexplicable aspect of each ending. The problem is that each playthrough is 8 to 10 hours, and you are playing nearly the same exact scenario every single time. The only difference is being slightly, and I mean slightly, different cutscenes for each ancient one and different enemy balancing. The best parts of the game are the least replayable. The puzzles remain the same each time. If combat were fun, it could carry everything else, but it only gets more and more frustrating every time you play. It's sad that the ultimate resolution of this game will be seen by so few because of that. Eternal Darkness was a groundbreaking horror game with some serious flaws that held it back from being a true classic. Critics agreed. It released to near universal acclaim in 2002. It currently has a 92 rating on Metacritic. Normally a game like this would be cleaned up and reach its true potential in a sequel, but that was not meant to be. It flopped hard on release, selling less than 500,000 copies worldwide over its entire lifetime. Nintendo quickly scrapped the already in pre-production sequel and assigned developer Silicon Knights to a Metal Gear Solid remake instead. Games this good usually garner a cult following, but that can't even be said to have happened, as a spiritual sequel titled Shadow of the Eternals failed multiple crowdfunding campaigns, and they weren't even close. Some of that failure can be attributed to Dennis Dyack, the former CEO of Silicon Knights who helmed the crowdfunding campaign, but had his own issues. But Eternal Darkness truly feels forgotten. It only garners mention every few years when Nintendo renews its trademark, bringing less and less hope each time that something will be done with it. It didn't even leave much legacy in the industry, as its trademark Sanity effects didn't really catch on, at least at this level of integration. Eternal Darkness, fittingly I suppose, remains forever in the dark.